Lauren Ecker, yes, wow, good to see you. Good, wow, unbelievable. Hang on, I'll say hi soon. Good morning, we're going to get started. I am not Dr. Klafter, but I do play him on TV. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Klafter, who is a close colleague and friend and has promised to take me boot shopping. The official bio says, sorry? Shoe shopping. I'm going to first learn the difference between shoes and boots. Dr. Klafter is a psychoanalyst, psychotherapist, and psychiatrist for adolescents and adults, and serves as a psychotherapy supervisor and consultant. He teaches psychotherapy and psychoanalytic theory and technique at the University of Cincinnati and the Cincinnati Psychoanalytic Institute, where he directs the Advanced Psychodynamic Psychotherapy program and oversees the technique curriculum in the psychoanalytic training program. He also serves as the senior psychiatric consultant for the Ezra Chaim Health Center, and that is Chaim with an I after the O. Ezra Chaim Health Center in Kiryas Shol, Monroe, New York. And now, Dr. Klafter in Parsippany, New Jersey.
Good morning. So I'm actually excited to share this presentation with you. These are your therapists, so you know we study the same things over and over and over again for years and years. It's similar to Torah study in that way. And I think that there are I feel excited to give over some classical ideas in a new way. So the order of the presentation, we're going to talk about empathy and compassion. We're going to talk about transference, countertransference, and enactment. We're going to talk about asymmetrical vulnerability. What do I mean by that? I'll explain it, but relationships where one person is much more vulnerable than the other, where there's not equal vulnerability in the relationship. And we'll talk about the psychotherapy relationship and the fact that it's set up to induce vulnerability in the patient. And we'll talk about how therapists emotionally react to patients. We'll talk about countertransference and diagnosis. We'll talk about narcissism and attachment as issues for the therapist. I'm not talking about the patient, but as issues for the therapist. And then I'll try to talk through the psychotherapy process, if we have time to get to that, with attention to the therapist's emotional involvement. I'll use a case vignette. And then at the end, I'll talk about therapy and consultation for psychotherapists. So, talk about compassion and empathy. So, how would you define compassion? How would people define compassion? Say that again? Feeling another person's emotions. Okay. Any other thoughts about this? So you get kindness to someone in need versus. So you think he's defining empathy more than compassion? So I think we all use terms in different ways, and that's why I wanted to spend a little time with terminology. So according to the textbooks, what Shimi is suggesting, which is feeling what another person feels, is empathy. And compassion is, here's the Merriam-Webster's definition, the distress and suffering that is triggered by another person's pain and our accompanying motivation to relieve it. So if someone is in pain, my compassion is that I feel, and maybe this is part of what you're talking about, like I feel uncomfortable. Their pain makes me uncomfortable, and it makes me want to end their pain. Like it's a drive inside of people. It is spoken about more recently in psychotherapy than it used to be. It's a lay term. It's not a professional concept, compassion. It's a lay term. It's just an English word. And so the consensus on definitions is in dictionaries. It's not a psychological concept. It's not based on scientific research. It's not, or a systematic investigation by experts in emotions. It's a general English word, compassion. So a lot of people think it's important to distinguish between compassion and empathy because altruism or empathy, these are things that are related to compassion. Like if someone has no compassion, we don't think of them as being an empathic person. You probably have to be somewhat compassionate to be capable of empathy. But empathy is different than compassion. Empathy, and let me back to this. By definition, compassion is a negative or unpleasant experience. This is something that's confusing for people because many people like to think of themselves as compassionate, and if someone would list compassion as one of your attributes or traits, you would be flattered. You would like the fact that people think that you're compassionate. But the actual experience for a compassionate person of another person's suffering is very distressing. So the experience of compassion is actually a negative experience. Like it's disturbing. Like the distress I feel that another person is suffering is what compassion is. And I want to end that suffering. I'm driven to end that suffering. That's what it means to be compassionate. So empathy, now the same people have both of these, but it's really a different activity in the brain or in the mind or in the feelings. Empathy is the ability to accurately perceive another person's subjective experience. Okay? So this really entered the psychotherapy and psychoanalytic literature in the very late 1950s and mostly the 1960s. Heinz Kohut defines it as vicarious introspection. And now, like most formative psychoanalytic thinkers, they had a way of ruining all their ideas with just terrible terminology and language. So I'm trying to devote my whole career to undoing that, actually. That's a summary of my career. So what he meant by vicarious introspection, let's talk about what introspection is. Introspection is the ability to look at and realize what you are thinking, what you are feeling, why you're thinking this, why you're feeling this. People who are introspective, probably everyone here has had the experience that you have a song going through your mind and you say, how did I get that song in my mind? Why am I thinking of that song? And you can go back, you want to know, why did I get this song in my mind? Did I hear it somewhere? Did I think of another song? Was I somewhere and it reminded me of a trip I was on when I heard that song? You'll go back and you'll trace your thoughts till you come up with how I'm thinking about this. That's something that introspective people do. Why am I so agitated right now? Why am I so impatient right now? What did Rabbi Union say that made me feel so nervous when he spoke? What was it that he did? And I'll wonder and I'll go back and think about it. And I'll come up with what I think the answer is. That's what an introspective person does. And it's important to you that you understand why you feel this way if you're introspective. Vicarious introspection is my ability to imagine being Rabbi Union and introspecting as if I were Rabbi Union. So I can vicariously become, in my imagination, Rabbi Union, and if I'm good at it, I can accurately imagine what it's like for Rabbi Union right now to sit in this, class. Now, the more I know about Rabbi Union, the more accurate I'll be. But some things about this. This is not just a lay term. Yes, Malky?
How does that differ from mentalization?
Okay, so that's a really important question, and I didn't spend a lot of time on mentalization, but I'll go through it now. So mentalization is entered in the literature from Peter Fonagy mostly, and Mary Target, or maybe her name's Target. I don't know if it's Target or Target, but I call her Mary Target, and that's also where I shop. I shop at Target. This jacket is not from Target. So mentalization is a more basic skill than empathy. Mentalization is, if I would tell you a story, most of you mentalize. Very few people that become therapists don't mentalize. I've met a couple and they didn't do well in therapy, but the vast majority of therapists mentalize very well. And it's the ability to, it's the tendency to think of other people with their motivations in mind. So if someone, if you would say right now, I'll be back in a minute, I'm not leaving your talk. If I mentalize, I will think of that incident, oh, Malky was worried that I'm going to be insulted, so she let me know that she left and she's going to come back. It's just the way I think of someone is I think of their motivations. It doesn't mean I'm right. It doesn't even mean I'm accurate. And many of my mentalizations will be about strangers, about people that I don't know. People are watching things in the media. There's a congressman who falsified his entire resume when he ran for office. We've all read about this. Everyone's like, why the heck did he do that? This is crazy. Why did he do that? We immediately come up with like a svara for why someone would do that. Is he a sociopath? Did he think he would get away with it? Who knows? We don't know him, but we can't help but wonder why he did this. It's not empathic in any way whatsoever. I don't know this man. I doubt I'll ever know this man. And I don't know why he did this, but I can't help but wonder what his motivations were when I hear a weird story. So if you mentalize, you think of another person's motivations, that's just how you think of someone. People that don't mentalize, like a relative of mine, who I won't tell you what this person's exact relation is to me, but if I would say, what do you think of that? You say, oh, he's crazy. He's an idiot. And that would be it. That would be the end of the story. He's crazy. He's an idiot. There's no attempt. There's no curiosity. There's no real engagement in what someone's motivations are. It's just, he's crazy. That's why he did it. He's crazy. So that's, it's if you can't mentalize, you also wouldn't be empathic. That's right. But it's a much more basic tendency. And people who don't mentalize have a lot of problems in their lives and their relationships. And there are therapies that are designed to teach mentalization, actually. It may be that many patients with borderline personality can't mentalize. I don't know if that's entirely true, but that's a theory that's out there. So empathy is a human capacity that gets cultivated over the maturation, over this, and not everyone is great at empathy. Some people really don't empathize. There are certain diagnoses where lack of empathy is one of the criteria. Like narcissistic personality, it's one of the criteria is not empathizing. It's not that they don't have the innate ability to mentalize. Narcissistic patients are just so busy and caught up with attending to their own narcissistic needs that there's like no bandwidth or energy left to attend to other people. That's why they seem to lack empathy. When things are great for those people, they might empathize very well, but they're caught up in this, so it interferes with their empathizing. So, and it's this concept, yes? Yeah, so the question is to clarify, because it's so important what I said, and I want that in the recording. Yes, okay. So, no, you were validating. We'll talk about that later. It's not that there's a lack of ability to empathize, like there's something wrong with their hardware or software in their brain. It's that in narcissistically injured or frantic states where self-esteem is dysregulated, there's like no energy left. It's sort of like, when someone punches you in the thigh and it really hurts and you're like, ow, and you're rubbing your thigh to make it not hurt. You're spending your energy rubbing your thigh and to try to make it not hurt anymore. You can't look at what's going on with other people. And that's what people with narcissistic vulnerability are like all the time or frequently. And so when they're in that state, they're going to be very unattuned to other people's emotions. Now, this concept of empathy is based on systematic observation by psychotherapists and psychoanalysts. It's like a professional concept. It's a professional term, a term of art, if you want to call it that. It's a human capacity. It needs to be cultivated. People who are, by and large, healthier and more at balance are better at this. They have more bandwidth or energy available for this. Now, here's another very important point there are a lot of misconceptions about. Now, you can disagree with this if you want to, but this is the official party line, which I do agree with, by the way, what I'm about to say, but some people disagree with this. It's based on self-knowledge. The people who are the most empathic are the most insightful about themselves. The more you know about your own emotions, the more empathically attuned you are to other people. It is not limited by gender, race, age, and culture. This is the important idea. If you believe in empathy, I can accurately imagine the emotions and the emotional experience of being a pregnant woman. I can do that. It might help if I've parented children and lived through pregnancies before and seen people go through it. That will help. But we don't believe, if you believe in empathy, you don't believe that it's impossible to actually have an accurate, subjective, joined experience with someone who is of a different culture, a different religion, a different ethnicity, a different gender, a different age. We believe that empathy transcends all of those barriers, and it is mostly based on your knowledge of yourself. It is not based on going out and learning everything about every other culture in the world. Now, that is not the mindset of some schools of psychotherapy nowadays, and it is also not the mindset of certain liberal political movements. But this is the mindset of self-psychology and of psychoanalysis and psychodynamic psychiatry, is that empathy transcends all of these barriers. And so that's just an important thing to keep in mind. And again, I am trying to convince you, but I understand you may disagree. But if you disagree with the idea of empathy, and it's an important thing to keep in mind. It's an essential component of the psychodynamic psychotherapy process. In a very important paper by Heinz Kohut, he said something really interesting. Every psychoanalytic concept that there is, every psychoanalytic concept that exists came into the field through empathic observation. Tens of thousands of hours of empathic observation of patients and comparing notes and discussing it. That's how we came up with the core concept of psychotherapy. And as we discover new things in psychotherapies, it's based on empathy. That's really the science, the scientific, it's not the same kind of science as neuroscience, but that's like the systematic observation and recording of emotion. That's what empathy is about. Might be a place to pause for some questions, and I enjoy questions during the presentation. I'll move it along if we need to, but I'd rather do that. Yes, sir, in front. Could you say that louder for me? I did not hear you. So I think what people mean by self-compassion would be self-acceptance. I think that's really what's meant by self-compassion. Self-compassion means the ability for me to realize that I'm not perfect and that I'm under duress at times and that there are times that I don't do my best, and I will not hate myself for that. It's not, if we're talking in a very technical way, which I'm trying to today, it's probably not the same thing as meant by the dictionary definition of compassion, which is that I'm in distress with another person's suffering and I want to end that suffering. It's actually a way to sort of slow yourself down and not have a lot of self-hatred toward yourself. That's what I think is meant by self-compassion. In the back. So this is also a really good question, and there are people that say what you're saying, and I'll repeat it for the tape, but I'm going to tell you my understanding, which is different. So the question is, could we differentiate based on what I said about narcissism and what limits empathy in people with narcissistic problems and antisocial personalities? Do they truly lack empathy, whereas narcissists have compromised empathy? So antisocial personalities, especially psychopathic personalities, also don't lack empathy. What they lack is a conscience. What they lack is a sense of morality or a sense of obligation or responsibility to other people. Con artists, by definition, are all psychopaths. If you're a con artist, you are a psychopath. Like, it's synonymous with being psychopathic. And con artists are very empathic. Like, they have a really accurate, intuitive sense of exactly what you're feeling, but they use that to prey upon you. The best way to diagnose an antisocial personality is that every relationship in their lives, they exploit those people. There is no one they will not steal from. There is no one they will not lie to. There's no one they will not victimize if it's to their benefit to do so. And that's really the definition of what it means to be sociopathic or antisocial. Now, I won't spend a lot of time on it because it would distract us, but there are different kinds of antisocial personalities. There are people who are cold and calculated. They're cold-hearted. There are people who are reactive and hot-headed. And they probably have a different sort of neurophysiology than people that are cold-hearted. But what they have in common is that they will not be inhibited from exploiting someone. And that's really what they have in common. And there are different types, but sociopaths can absolutely have empathy. I think con artists are the best illustration of that. Salespeople are very empathic, and they're not doing it to benefit us. They're doing it to make a sale, and the better they are at it, the more empathic they are. You know, it's a skill, and people can use their superpowers for good or evil. So people do use empathy for bad ends. I think there's sort of a rose-colored idea about empathy that it is like the secret to all being good, and it absolutely isn't. Go on a little to the next. So, some misconceptions and key points. Yes. I think many of them are. Yes, I think many antisocial people are aware that they're antisocial. Much more than people who are narcissistic will be aware that they're narcissistic. Yeah. So compassion. Compassion is a really common motivation for therapists and all helping professionals. I mean, people that enter helping professions are probably largely driven by compassion, and we wouldn't want to do this work. I mean, there is a wish to heal and alleviate suffering. That's a very Jewish virtue. It's certainly a hallmark for physicians, for nurses, for therapists, for social workers. I think it's really I think for clergy, I think it's really in all helping professions. We don't feel compassion equally for all people. We just don't. Maybe some people are highly compassionate and they have more compassion for some people than I'm able to, but they themselves don't feel compassionate for all people equally. The pain we feel when our children are hurt, we have much more compassion for our children than others, and that actually is hard for us. Like, we don't think clearly necessarily while our children are in pain because we're so overwhelmed by our compassion. So it isn't only a virtue, it also can be a liability. It can interfere with clear thinking with a lot of things. Compassion has to be overcome. This is a very hard thing to understand. Yes, if you don't have compassion, probably not going to be empathic. But you have to overcome your compassion to cultivate empathy. Compassion is really about the inability to tolerate another person's pain. And so you have to overcome that ability to sit with the difficult feelings that another person has to empathize with them. So the instinctive feeling that we all have to like extinguish the pain, put out the fire, end the pain as soon as possible, that really interferes with empathy. Now, how many of us know that when our own children come to us with a complaint, we can be terrible listeners because we immediately want to solve that problem, solve it for them right away. Or our own mothers did this with us. And we can do that with patients, and some of our therapists did that for us. We talk to someone and we immediately get advice about what to do so this won't be a problem anymore. You know, my dad is like that. My dad gives very good advice, but he doesn't want to hear about what a hard time I'm having. He wants to end the problem as soon as possible. Tell me what to do, very helpful in pointing out everything I did wrong so this will never happen again. But it's really driven by his compassion, but it isn't empathic. He doesn't know how I'm feeling. He doesn't wanna, he wants to end this nonsense now so it won't be a problem and I won't, whatever he imagines, get arrested or something. So that's what he's driven to do. That's out of love for me, but that's not empathic. He's not attuned to my feelings. And we would have trouble, that's one of the reasons we have trouble treating people that we're so close to socially. You know, we can't really do that. We need to have a little distance. We need to not take responsibility to end every problem at that moment, or we won't be able to do therapy. So compassion has to be overcome. As I said, it requires sitting with those feelings and not succumbing to the urge to end them. Now, empathy, this is something that I think is a really important insight. So I recommend the book by Stefano Bolognini, Psychoanalytic Empathy. It was written in Italian originally, and he's not good at English at all, but he has a wonderful translator now, so his books are coming out into English. So Psychoanalytic Empathy, another beautiful book by him is called Secret Passages. But in his book, Psychoanalytic Empathy, he distinguishes between different types of empathy. Some types of empathy that he thinks are really not empathic, and I want to talk about, I'm not going to use the same exact language that got translated into English because it's so esoteric and confusing. What I'll call validation or superficial empathy. Validation or superficial empathy for the person who's being validated feels very pleasant, easy, and validating. And what it is it's when I am attuned to the narrative that you want to believe for yourself. So if, for example, someone says, you know, I'm not angry at you, I'm just angry at the situation. Okay, that's something that I'm not angry at you, I'm frustrated by the situation. I mean, who has anyone not said that before at some point? I'm not angry at you, I'm frustrated by the situation. It's never true. No one has ever been frustrated by a situation. We're angry at people. Like, anger is an affect that's directed to another person. But it's unpleasant to think of yourselves as being angry, especially at someone you love. That's like one of the most unpleasant feelings in the world, is anger at someone you love. So there's a rationalized version of it that the person will say, I'm just frustrated by the situation, I'm not angry at you. So if we would validate that, yeah, I can tell you're not angry at me because so-and-so. You're validating that person's defense against the uncomfortable feeling that's deeper down. Psychoanalytic empathy or deep empathy is jarring and it's difficult and it's challenging. And psychoanalytic empathy or deep empathy is where I'm aware, I can feel this experience that you're not letting yourself feel. Like, I can be attuned to something that you yourself are not allowing yourself to be attuned to. And that's really the type of empathy that we're talking about in psychotherapy treatment, that I become aware of something you're not yet able to let yourself know about. Anger, desire, regret, shame, fear, resentment, hostility, arousal, and attraction, especially when it's forbidden, vulnerability. These are emotions that, you know, unless you have a lot of experience working on to let yourself feel them, and a lot of safety that you can dwell on it in that moment, you can't go around all day feeling these things, or you'll be a crazy person that will never get anything done. So, you know, we have a lot of very important mechanisms in the mind to shield us from these things. And others sometimes sense our emotions before we do. I mean, that's something that's true. You know, we can see emotions in other people, they can see them in us before we perceive them ourselves. So the type of empathy we're talking about is this deeper empathy, which is validation is not the same thing as empathy. Validation is often very unempathic. Validation is when you help someone avoid what they don't want to feel or believe. And it often isn't therapeutic either, even though it's pleasant, it's polite. Validating is for the Shabbos table, probably not for your office. That's what I think often. The validation, I don't know if I can repeat it. I was inspired. Validation is polite and pleasant, and it helps someone avoid the emotion that they don't want to feel. That's what's validating. So you're helping someone avoid what they don't want to dwell on. Empathy is you're helping someone, you're experiencing and sharing your experience of something that they do not themselves wish to be in touch with at that moment. And it isn't pleasant. It's jarring. Now, in the long run, repeated empathic exposure will produce a lot of health, and you will overall be much happier as a person as you come to know parts of yourself you didn't let yourself know. But each moment along the way could be a very uncomfortable situation and won't feel validating. Empathy can feel, jarring or upending rather. An example of empathizing with feelings that the person will not let themselves know. Okay. Well, so I have a patient right now who has been in psychoanalytic treatment for about 8 years, and she's coming to the end of her treatment. And among the things that she's been talking about in her treatment is a very disappointing marriage. She's deeply disappointed in her marriage, deeply disappointed in her husband. She's come to realize that her husband is very, very limited. And she is afraid that, now I think it really is time for her to end her treatment. I think that we've done a lot of really good work, and I think it's time for her to end the treatment. But she is afraid, she said she is afraid that it might be very hard for her to go through a divorce while she's not in treatment, and she's really thinking of divorce right now. And I said, that's interesting. I have a different understanding about that. I think that without treatment, it might be harder for you to stay married than it has been, and that you might end up getting divorced because you don't have the supportive treatment anymore, which was very, very difficult for her to hear, because it caused her to think about the fact that, being in the marriage is probably more painful than it may be to be divorced. And she's been using her psychoanalytic treatment not to grapple with getting divorced, but to buffer her marriage in a way. So it was very hard for her to tolerate this idea. That's just a recent thing that came to mind. And it changed how she's thinking about what she's doing in her marriage. What I think she's going to do is really have another very serious try, marital therapy, which I hope will be successful for them. I do not. Okay, here we go. So that's an example. And yes?
For the top of your slide, you talked about compassion to overcome the health of that case. I'm thinking about two cases of mine who are kind of compulsive caregivers, and they someone's in need, they jump in to rescue them. Another person is kind of neglect themselves. And so I think certain patients have a lot of compassion, but it kind of interferes with their own boundaries.
Yeah, that's, I don't have that written down, but I think that's also a good point. In other words, lunging into helping behaviors can be an avoidance. Now, look, it's also wonderful. People do wonderful things for complex reasons. The fact that something is wonderful doesn't mean the motivations are all, pure and conscious. That's what we believe about human beings, is that they do wonderful things for horrible reasons, and they can also do horrible things for wonderful reasons. That's what's so complicated about people. So I think that's a good example. And there are absolutely many people that are, just addicted to chesed projects or addicted to caregiving, and they run themselves ragged because it's more painful to look at their own needs. Or they can be, selfless for people outside of their home, but they are oblivious to pain inside their home. We all know and have had patients like this. We know them socially and professionally. People with this kind of makeup, I think. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you again. I'm sorry. Is anyone else hear him? Or?
validation and compassion, I think, be very therapist to your work.
Oh, do I think compassion and validation have a place in the beginning phase of therapy before moving on to deeper things? Is that essentially the question? I don't disagree with that. It's not like how I think about it. I don't disagree with that. I mean, I think that compassion and validation are sort of like more natural human interactions that we use all the time in conversation and with our friends and with our loved ones. I mean, like our compassion and our validation is just how we engage in conversation. You know, like it's like small talk. Of course, we still do small talk with our patients. If the first time someone comes in and says, "Hi, how are you?" and you say, "Why do you ask?" or "How do you imagine I am?" like that would be just such a weird thing to do. And so, like, you know, we will continue to use sort of normal human interaction. So I don't think we ever lose compassion and validation. But so I don't think we need to be deliberate about it. I think that compassion and validation are just kind of like our basic human skill set, and they're not particularly therapy skills. And I think they're always there. I think that when someone has an emotional conflict that's very complicated and they're unaware of it and we don't understand it, so we have to do deep, meticulous work for that to come out, that's when we need to go into a mode that we don't use in normal discourse and normal social conversations. And then we're acting like therapists and not like friends or not like siblings or not like teacher-student. We have to get out of that normal way of operating. And so that's when we have to overcome compassion. I don't think fundamentally compassion and validation are all that healing. I think that people who come to us for treatment have gotten a lot of compassion and validation already just from their loved ones and the general public. If they're so toxic in their behavior that no one will validate or have compassion for them, then it's a different kind of a problem. We need to rein in their behavior so they can get along with people. But I don't think that it requires as much deliberate attention to cultivate validation or compassion. I think that's sort of natural, polite interaction. Yes?
First of all, I see compassion and validation as very, very two different things. I use validation a lot. I use it, I plan on it as a kind of focus because by validation, it doesn't mean I agree. It just means that the way I use it, may not agree, but at least I hear what you're saying. I got it. And that, I use that to lead into dealing with or drawing out the conflict so that I can help give them the tools to work on why they're there, or leading up to why they're there. But I do validation a lot. And from my perspective, at least for me, it seems to work. Now, it's a technique. I have to know when to use it, when not to use it. But again, going back to the first thing I said, I don't put compassion and validation together at all. I see them as very, very completely different tools. I wouldn't say that I use compassion that much, but I use validation.
Right, so I think we're probably using the terminology a little bit different. What you're describing as a psychotherapy technique is not what I mean by validation. Like there are times that I certainly deliberately do things that you would call validating. I just don't use that term, especially people who doubt their judgment. There are people who doubt their judgment because they're so self-critical, so they're afraid to like come to a conclusion. So, you know, I will be sort of confirming, no, that is, you know, an absolutely valid judgment that you've made. You know, she is exploiting you. You are correct about that. I will do that. And that's someone who's, because they're afraid to acknowledge that they're being betrayed or exploited or deceived in some way because they can't. But really what I'm doing is I'm working on their inhibitions over their hostility. People, you know, that they can't tolerate the conflict, the hostility, the anger. So it's not that, it's a little bit of semantics, but that's really what I think I'm doing. I imagine if we would talk through a case, I would probably see your work in a similar way. Like the moments that validation is necessary, what you're doing is you're working with an emotional problem that is interfering with their judgment, and you're actually helping resolve an emotional conflict in some way. What I mean by validation is that, you know, to help someone feel more secure in a narrative and avoid an unpleasant narrative, In that case that I'm saying, it's actually very unpleasant. They don't want to acknowledge that they're being deceived. Like I had a patient whose girlfriend was stealing his Adderall and abusing it or selling it. We don't know exactly. And he just didn't want to know that this was the case. And he was wondering. So, yes, we could call that validating, but I wasn't validating. I was really working with his inability to tolerate his anger and acknowledging that his sociopathic girlfriend was exploiting him. He couldn't tolerate that. So I have a feeling that would be sort of, there's a semantics issue, I think, in this. Malky. That's a very interesting comment. I mean, for me, I don't think that I can do this as deliberately as the way some people are thinking about it. Like, I think that it takes me a while to get attuned to deep conflicts and what's going on. So in the process of doing that, I will be more superficial because I'm only attuned to what's superficial. But like, it's not like a strategy that I'm going to do this till it's the right time to do that. It's like when I become aware, and I think it's helpful to say, that's when I'll say it. And as I get to know someone more deeply over time, I will be able to work in a deeper space and be more helpful most of the time. So to me, it just sort of naturally evolves in that direction. It's not a deliberative process when I decide what to do. I mean, I think that a lot of my work is like that. I mean, afterward, I could kind of pretend that I said it, but it's, look, that's what came to my mind at that moment, and it seemed to be helpful to say, and that's sort of how I think, in the hot seat, that's how I think my interventions usually go. Any other comments here or thoughts here, or we'll move on? Okay, so I'm going to talk about transference. I promise that I will talk about this in a new way, and this will not be an egg-headed, boring term for you after this presentation. All right, so I'd like to think, so transference, anyone here that does not know the term transference because you never studied basic psychodynamics, or everyone has been through basic psychodynamic concepts and knows what transference means in a textbook way? So I want to talk about transference in what I think will be a very experience-near, sensible, practical manner. Let's start with this. There are characteristic ways that we relate to other people. Okay? There are just ways like as Nachum Klafter, there are ways that I relate to people. My friends who know me, they can predict when I'm going to make an inappropriate joke. They can predict when I'm going to get annoyed at something. They know what's going to annoy me. They can tell who I'm going to... if I know you well, I know who you're going to like. I know who you're not going to like. There was someone, there are two people. There's someone that I met like about 10 years ago at a Nefesh conference, and I met a new person this conference that I thought, these guys are going to love each other. I cannot wait to introduce them. And I went to introduce them, and actually they know each other and they're friends already. And they wanted to know, we're so similar. What did you see in us that you thought that we'd like each other? And we had a conversation about this. When you know someone, there are characteristic ways that people feel about themselves, feel about others. How I imagine you feel about me, how I imagine you will respond to me, how I feel about myself. There are characteristic ways that happens for people, and it's consistent over time. It's a permanent part of our personalities. We carry it with us wherever we go. So this is just sort of in the background of the idea of transference. It starts with the notion that there are predictable, characteristic ways that you engage with others, that people trigger you, what they trigger in you. Any questions or comments about this? This is step one of this concept. Shimi.
It's not, because we're heading toward it.
in the world, not in the psychotherapy experience.
And not necessarily based on particular people, it's just like a lens through which you interact with the world.
Well, that's interesting. Clarify the last part of your question.
It could be a lens, like a filter, or it could be inherent in the person, but it's something inherent in the person that is not necessarily based on who the other person is.
Okay, so let's take two people. You and Heike, okay? Let's say that I know someone who is a very, very stern, authoritarian, but brilliant and impressive orator. And I can imagine how you will respond to that person, how Heike will respond to that person. And it may be different, but I know you, and I can predict what will trigger you, and I know Heike, I can predict what will trigger her. You could have two people that you can predict will be triggered very differently by a similar personality type. But that's each person's pattern that they bring with them.
That's your knowledge or definition of my transference.
So I'm not even calling it transference yet. I'm calling it your characteristic way of reacting to people and your characteristic way of reacting to people. And these are more or less stable part. They're not permanent, like they can change. You know, I said permanent, but that's a bad word. If we didn't believe it would change, we wouldn't be able to do any therapy with anybody. We do believe this can change over time, but these are stable aspects of who you are as people, how you relate to, who you like, who you don't like, what offends you, what stimulates you, what excites you, what soothes you, what interests you, what doesn't, what turns you off. These are relatively stable things. And so, you know, we make matches, we make shidduchim based on this. If you know someone, I just imagine you guys would really hit it off. No, I don't think you two would hit it off. You know, it's based on this idea that I feel like I sense what your pattern is. And I think we believe that about human beings, or it would be impossible to describe a personality. Or, you know, what movie do I think you'd like? I think you'd really like this movie. David, I don't think so much, would like this movie. You know, like that is something that we all believe about other people. Any other questions or comments on this? Yes. So this is a part of personality. This is a part, you know, your characteristic ways of relating to other people. There are essentially 4 dimensions of personality. One dimension of personality is how you control your impulses. Another dimension of personality is how you cognitively imagine, how you cognitively conceive of yourself relating to others. You know, if I get a text message that says, "Are you around? Can I talk to you?" One person is going to imagine, "Oh no, I'm in trouble. What did I do wrong?" And you might answer back, "I didn't do it." You know, that might be what you answer back. Another person's like, "Oh good, he wants to hang out with me. We're going to have fun." The same person, that's a cognitive difference between, and that's pretty stable. A third is your affective reactivity. Do you get easily excited? Is it hard to excite you? Do you get bored easily, like your emotions? And the fourth is your pattern of relationships. So it's like one of the 4 dimensions of personality. It's probably the dimension that therapists are the most interested in. So we think of it as being like the most important one or one of the 2 most important ones because we can work on it. You know, cognition and relationship patterns are the most amenable to the therapies that we do. Your temperament, your emotional reactivity, you know, like that's harder to control. There are things we can do, but we don't work on that as overtly. So it's one of the 4 core dimensions of human personality. Any other thoughts about this? We all good on this? Anyone take issue with this? Yes? This is these are not, this is sort of the preamble to getting to the idea of transference, or we're working our way up. It's not the definition yet. Specific situations and personality types trigger different reactions, as I was talking about with Shimi before, but we think it's mostly influenced by early childhood experiences. That's what we believe. We believe that this is mostly influenced by your early childhood experiences. Now we're going to do a thought exercise. Who is willing, I promise that I won't interpret it in front of anybody other than Shimmy. Shimmy, I'm going to interpret yours. But no one else will I do that. What is your first childhood memory? I'll tell you, my first childhood memory is I have an older sister who's actually from my father's first marriage, and was adopted by my father and his first wife, who died very young. My mother is my father's second wife. He was a widower. So I have a sister who's significantly older, and she was kind of like a second mom figure. In fact, she still calls her son by my name, accidentally, all the time. And he's 31 years old, and she still does that. My first memory is sitting in my big sister's lap in the front yard as, like a toddler, and playing with my sister and my mom. That's my first memory that I have. That's what I remember. I have a very soon memory after that. Don't worry, I'm not that well adjusted. I have a very soon memory after that about wetting my pants and being afraid my father was going to be very mad at me. I have that one, but that's not my first memory. What are people's first memories here? What are your first memories? Can anyone tell us your first memory? Yes? Sitting on a porch on a Friday night with your mother there, your father's not there, and you're not sure why. Anyone else have a first memory you can share? Yes? Okay. Malky. It's not so bizarre, not such a bizarre memory. Yes?
I remember I must have been about 3 years old, and we had a non-Jewish nanny or housekeeper or something like that. She gave me a drink, and in order to get me to drink the whole thing, she put a sticker on the bottom of the cup so that when
You could see the sticker when it...
the sticker was this godlike looking person. She said, "You see that? That's God."
All right. We're going to have an emergency hashkafa intervention after this with Rabbi Union for you. Okay. Yes. Go ahead. You, yeah. Mr. Cunin, right? That's your name. Yes, go ahead.
I was like 2 years old. There was this construction workers working, and one of the construction workers gave me some of their not kosher food. And my father, who's a rabbi, realized, ran over and quickly stuck his finger in my mouth and started scooping out all the not kosher food.
This is a very frum group, I have to tell. I mean, this is really... So, Rabbi Union, I notice, is not sharing his first memory. We'll let you get away with that. Now this is not that important or deep an exercise. We sometimes use first memories. We think of it, we call it a screen memory. We think of it as sort of like an emblem for how someone sort of relates to, like, what is the emblem that got affixed to your very early childhood, and it can somehow be meaningful. And most of these memories have some conflicts in them, right? Most of them do. My house had a lot of tension between my sister and my stepmother, and I was often felt like I had to be a peacemaker. And my first memory is, me between these two women who are both taking care of me. That's my first memory. You have something that's fun and someone took it away from you. You have an early loss and then worried about entertaining the guests, even though your grandmother was supposed to be comforted by others, if I understood it correctly. These all have some conflicts in them. You're being coaxed into doing something. You're doing something that is dangerous, and your father's going to save it. These are interesting memories. So that's one. But there is, we believe in some ways. So let me continue the thought exercise. Let's say that you have a child. I want you to imagine what might be sort of the adult pattern of problems or difficulties with some of these vignettes I'm going to give you. A child who senses that his parents were very annoyed and aggravated by him. That's what his childhood was like. what is that person's adulthood going to be like, probably? Do we know or we don't know? Do we have like an inkling as to what, what do we imagine? What do people imagine? Yeah. Become a people pleaser. Very interesting. Mrs. Brownstein, what he said. Okay. We forgive him for plagiarizing. Yes. Low self-esteem. A lot of shame. Child who's... Yes, Mark. Oh, like repeating it. Repeating this in some way. Child who senses his parents are very frustrated. Oh, that's similar. Child with very narcissistic parents who demand that he idealizes and admires them. What do we imagine that person's adulthood might be like? Yes. So that this would lead to perfectionism, you're imagining. Yes. Explain that. Not allowing someone to get very close because it's too risky. Too risky. So the relationships feel unsafe. So like an avoidant personality. We'll do one more. Child whose father abandoned the family and feels that he did so out of frustration with his or her needs and demands. Yes. Feels too needy. This person will feel too needy as an adult. And what will the person do in adult relationships? Never express their needs, not demand anything, always like go with the flow, but be disappointed probably. Feeling guilty. Tell me what gives you that idea. That's interesting. Oh, because of the child's needs. Overwhelmed by the child's needs. Feels guilty for their needs. They're a burden on other people. Oh, that I caused this distress in the family. Feeling guilty. So what we are doing is we are sort of doing a thought exercise where we're kind of imagining, how do early experiences set you up to feel that way about people in general. Now, I'm going to continue with like a little bit of a diagram to illustrate transference. So this is based on an approach to transference. It comes from a larger subset of theories called, again, great terminology, object relations theories. It's really helpful and descriptive, right? The specific version of this is based on research by Lester Laborsky, who was a psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania, and he basically researched relationships and transference. And so this follows what's called the CCRT method. So let's imagine that this individual, now this theory is based on the idea that, I think I have a pen I can use here. A laser pointer. Is this, yeah, okay, got it. That inside your mind, you have a concept of who you are, you have a concept of other people, and you have a concept of how you're interacting with one another. That goes on in your mind 24/7. It's like a movie that you're the star of, and it's all day long, every single day. And there's many different scenes in the movie, there's different characters in the movie, but you are interacting with other people. And this gets set up in your mind, a primitive version. It changes over time, thank God, but a primitive version of this gets set up by the time you're probably 5 or 6 years old. You have an early version of this. So let's say you grow up in a home where what you start to believe about yourself is that these people, they call themselves my parents or whoever is taking care of me, they're really too busy for me. They're too busy to talk to me. And I'm annoying to them. When I need to talk to them, like, they're annoyed, they're busy, they don't have time for this. Like, they're on a phone call, they're in an important meeting, they're preparing a shiur, they're preparing a lecture, they're preparing for court, they're attending to all the other children in the house. They're just too busy to talk to me. And whenever I need something, they're annoyed. So I feel like I'm annoying them all the time. So that's age 5. Let's go 20 years later at age 25, where this person meets a young woman in class. And this young woman, and now this theory says the following. It says that there are 3 stages to every human interaction. The 3 stages are the following. The first stage is I have a wish or a need to enact with another person. The second stage is I imagine if I would just directly act out that wish or need, I imagine what the other person's going to do in response. And then the third stage, which is the actual behavior, there's no behavior yet. Your actual behavior is your response to how you imagine they would have responded. Now, I'll spell it out so it doesn't sound so abstract. The wish is, I'm in class, and there's a young woman, and she has really interesting things to say in class. And she seems so smart, and it was so insightful. And I don't know where she heard that from, and I just want to hear more from her. So my wish is I'd like to get to know her. She's interesting. I'd like to get to know her. What does this person imagine her response will be? Now, for those of you who know me, this isn't my internal constellation, right? I'm not shy in getting to know people. But this person, what does he imagine? I imagine if I say, oh my gosh, what you said was so interesting. Can I talk to you more? You'll be flattered. Why wouldn't you be flattered? That's what I imagine. But what does this person imagine? Yeah, she's too busy for me. I'll annoy her. So what will his actual behavior be? He'll leave her alone. Right. So this is a research-based model of this called, again, the CCRT method. And they went through thousands and thousands of human interactions and interviews about them, and they devised this 3-step scheme. And they show that there is excellent inter-rater reliability. If you will show the same transcript of an interaction to a bunch of different professionals, they will devise the same wish, anticipated response, real response, and they will also anticipate that the core relationship conflict, they will agree with one another about the same core relationship conflict. This conflict will spell itself out in people's actual interactions. Now, final stage of this concept is, what is this like in asymmetrical relationships? So an asymmetrical relationship is a relationship with a differential in power, authority, or dependency. Okay, so what are relationships that are like that? Teacher-student relationship. That's a very asymmetrical relationship. Rabbi-congregant relationship is very asymmetrical. Adult-child relationship is very asymmetrical. Boss-employee, that's very asymmetrical. Supervisor-supervisee. I could put commander, military officer, infantry. And we'll say psychotherapist and patient. These are very asymmetrical relationships. We believe there's something special about what this pattern of imagining how other people are going to feel about you, that it gets exaggerated when you're in a relationship with a great power differential. We think it's greatly intensified and exaggerated. Like the conflicts that we talked about, the way that people imagine, it's going to be even more exaggerated. Why is that? Why do we think that in this sort of relationship where there's greater, and why are these asymmetrical? Because there's much more vulnerability in the person who is in the subordinate position. That person is much more vulnerable than the other person. Why does that lead to an exaggeration of this pattern of being triggered and feelings? We think it's probably because it's reminiscent of early experiences in childhood or with caregivers. It's just like, it feels like a replay. All these relationships, they do have like a parental type of authority for us. And that's when we were the most vulnerable in our lives and had the most need and hope for the older, more powerful people to take care of us. So we regress back in that kind of relationship. And we also think that the therapy-patient relationship, even among all these hierarchical relationships, that's another special case. Now, why is that? Why is it a special case? Any thoughts about that? Yes? So the boundaries are what make it exaggerated, you think? Yes, and I think the boundaries are what create the very asymmetrical vulnerability, actually. I agree with you. Like, so in a psychotherapy relationship, you know, I don't really have needs from you as my patient or client. It's not because I'm so powerful and you're so nebuch and useless. It's because we've constructed a relationship where what I need from you is to attend appointments and pay your bill. That's what I need you to do. And then I'm here to serve your needs. It's such an exaggerated dependency, and there's so much vulnerability. The whole relationship is designed to attend to your needs. I don't think any of the other relationships are like that. I mean, boss-employee, like I need my employee to do the work. I depend on my employee. Congregant-rabbi, I mean, the congregants pay the bill, ultimately. You're also a client in some way. I think all these relationships, the psychotherapy relationship, there is more vulnerability in that relationship than the other relationships. I think it's also interesting to note, so it's deliberately designed that way. I said it's like a vulnerability generator. That's what the psychotherapy relationship is. Yes, Mark.
You're often inviting vulnerable material. It's not like you're a boss, employee. It's a very straightforward transactional experience. This is not straightforward transactional experience. The client is bringing out committed or early or
Your most tender, vulnerable, difficult things are what ultimately you're going to talk about. And I'm not going to. I'm not going to talk about those parts of me with you. Like, it's very, very uneven. It's very asymmetrical. It's deliberately asymmetrical. And it's asymmetrical specifically over vulnerability. That's exactly what it is. So, yes.
Explicitly talking about the relationship in ways that not. Like none of the other affairs was how much attention came to the actual relationship.
You need more friendship with therapists. You're right. Normal people don't do that. That's true. Normal people don't do that. I have a cousin in Boston who does that for some reason, but most people don't do that. Yes, it is a weird relationship. There's very few relationships where people can be that deliberate in talking about their feelings and what I did and what triggered. You know, it's why it's another talk, but that's why therapists can be kind of weird in relationships sometimes. You know, they can be weird in relationships. Like, they want to talk about every feeling, and like the other person does not. What's like, what are you talking about? Like, why do we have to talk about this? We talked about this already. Like, didn't we do this conversation last night till I went to sleep? Like, why are we doing this again? So you're right, therapists, but the psychotherapy relationship is different. I do think that's why therapists like to be friends, and I've noticed that a lot of second marriages are between therapists. I've noticed that also. The term transference is formally or technically reserved for this relationship. That's actually what the technical definition of transference refers to. Now, I think you can think about transferences in other settings also. We have transferences to our boss, transferences to our in-laws, but that's not really exactly what it means, because those relationships are not going to devolve into the kind of vulnerability that happens in psychotherapy. For reasons you're saying, you're not going to open up about all of these things. It's going to be a really weird relationship with your shver. But so that's where we technically use the term. You will see people talking about the concept of transference in the larger world, but this is technically what it means. It means the psychotherapy relationship because it's a special relationship. It's also interesting to note, I don't have my own thoughts about it, but these are all the relationships and situations where there's potential for great abuse. I mean, the examples I gave, like the hierarchical relationships, they're just rife for tremendous abuse, and people are very vulnerable in those relationships. We think that they're vulnerable in a unique way in the psychotherapy relationship, probably. Yes, Rabbi Union. Um, That's very interesting. I also think that there is something really, a lot of, I only know about it in the Jewish world, but I think I assume other clergy relationships, but absolutely with rabbis and congregants. I mean, I've seen so many rabbis blindsided by such unpredictable, primitive emotional reactions from congregants, and I think there are very powerful transferences that people have to their rabbis who are like, it's a father figure, they're representing God, so it's like a father figure and God, and usually not the kind of training to deal with transferences that therapists have. So I think it's a real professional vulnerability for rabbis to be blindsided by people that have strong primitive emotional reactions to them that they just have no anticipation for, and it's so far removed from what the rabbi's aware of in their relationship, and like just seems like this comes out of nowhere to me. I have no idea why this person's reacting this way. What'd you say? Yeah, it is, and I think it's about a transference type of reaction in that relationship. So, any questions or thoughts about this right now? Okay. We're going to go on to countertransference, and then we'll probably take a brief break. So countertransference, going to ask some questions for people. How do the following patients make you feel? How do depressed patients make you feel? Or can you not generalize? They make you feel depressed. They make you feel bored. Someone said hopeless. They make you feel hopeless. Low energy. Compassion. Sad for them. That's compassion, I think. Frustrated. What did you say? Impatient. Yes. Angry. How do seductive patients make you feel? Uncomfortable. You're going to have to do better than uncomfortable. That's not a feeling. That's like, I'm not going to describe how I feel. What's the uncomfortable feeling from seductive patients? How do seductive patients make you feel? Anxious? Annoyed? Fearful? Intolerant? What was that? I can't hear you. Vulnerable. Okay. Looking for the door. All right. I'm going to go with fear for that one. That's not a feeling. I'm going to go for fear. What would you say? Someone said something here? Oh, it depends. It depends on their clothing. Okay. Patients. With you. Seductive toward you, the therapist. I don't know what it means to be seductive with yourself. I think it's toward the other person there. Well, but you're the one there with that vibe, right? You're the one in the room with them, so it's, yeah. Yes, that's a successful, more, right. That's a more, yes. Exhausted. Okay, interesting. How about patients who admire you? How does that make you feel? Powerful. Okay, so they succeed. So, patients who demand special accommodations. Angry? What was that? Annoyed. Okay, angry, annoyed. No one likes these. Does anyone have a positive? Let's just skip it. Does anyone have a positive response to people that demand special accommodations? Heike, you do?
How many special accommodations they have.
And how often? It depends if they're seductive.
Oh. Yeah. Okay. Yes, you were going to say something. You.
It makes me feel under pressure, and it makes me feel, I'm wondering why they think that they can do this. And it's something that, I think it becomes part of the therapy practice, figure out why these people are feeling that they have the right to be so demanding. And then they don't get what they want.
Okay. Obsessive compulsive patients. So it's interesting. They did some research, and we have a lot of obsessive compulsive problems in our community, and I assume in this room, because therapists also have obsessive compulsive problems. But obsessive compulsive symptoms, research has shown that therapists have more dread from seeing obsessive compulsive patients than other patients. And it's something about the relentless nature that it won't stop. It just doesn't stop. And I think you can use that to realize what it must feel like for them, because they also have the same dread of their obsessive compulsive difficulties. It's like relentless for them. It just won't stop. Like they get it under control, it comes back. But that is something that research has borne out. Borderline patient, narcissistic patients rather. Scared? Run away? Okay. What was that? Threatened? On your personal history. Right. Yeah, I personally do okay. I don't feel particularly triggered by narcissistic or borderline patients. How about when you see a communal religious leader or an outstanding Talmid Chacham as a patient? What does that trigger in you? Yes.
It triggers a sense of pride. It shows it may not be a very good thing to count.
Well, I don't know about you, but I can't choose my countertransference on whether it's good or not. So I think that's a fair response. Yeah, I can't decide which one I'm going to have. So you feel gratified narcissistically in some way that an important person comes to you. A very wealthy patient might be in a similar category. Yes. The wealth not, but the Torah does. Right. Say that again. Cautious and hesitant. So you're worried in some way. Oh, you would feel deference. So you'd have trouble keeping your professional sense about you. Other personal examples, but I think I won't ask them. This room has shared plenty now. So the countertransference, what it technically means is the therapist's transference back to the patient. Okay, that's where the word comes from. It's the transference back to the patient. It's not within our control. Okay, you cannot, so you said it might not be a very therapeutic or good reaction to have, but by definition, you cannot control your countertransference. If you can control it, it's not countertransference. We're talking about something you cannot control. It's an emotional reaction that you're not choosing to have, and it happens by definition without our knowledge. You cannot be aware of your countertransference until you're already reacting. The more experienced you are, the more work you've done in your own treatment and supervision, and the more naturally psychologically minded you are, you can catch it sooner before you've acted it out too much. But you probably will have acted it out to some degree already. And you cannot see it coming. It's impossible. You can anticipate it, like you can know, oh no, I feel X, Y, and Z when I treat this kind of person, but you're still going to have that reaction. It's something that's not in your conscious control or awareness. You can become aware, but you're already having the feelings afterward. And by the way, our bodies and the primitive parts of our minds react before we know that they're reacting. Like that's just true about all animals, everyone in the animal kingdom, and it's certainly true of human beings. So we're having reactions before we're aware of the reactions. So it's by definition, it's unconscious. It's part of the definition of transference and countertransference. It's determined by our own, in other words, just as a human being, I have my own transferences of personalities, but I'm not the patient in this scenario. It's not the same, my transference to the patient is not the same thing as the patient's transference to me, because I'm on the other side of that asymmetry. The patient is more regressed than I am. The patient is very vulnerable. I am much less vulnerable. It's not the same reaction. We think, we believe, and certainly once you've gotten some handle on your inner life through treatment and supervision and experience, we believe that it is largely determined by the patient's transference to you. In other words, you're reacting. So I gave exceptions. Like you know that you can have this reaction. If a great Torah scholar is in your office, you have a certain reaction. You have a certain reaction. So that overrides your sort of normal professional mindset. But most patients, what you are really feeling is their powerful transference to you. So your countertransference is a reaction to that transference. There's also your own stuff, but we don't believe it's like purely your own stuff and you're just a human being. It's a special circumstance. There's this very asymmetrical relationship. There's a transference to you, and you are going to react to that transference. In addition to all of your other normal mishigasen. Those are there too, but the patient's reaction to you is the paramount trigger that you're reacting to in some way. And you don't know that you are until it's already happening. You will notice your countertransference before you even understand the patient's transference. You will notice your feelings before you know why they're being triggered. So that's how we think that this unfolds. Yes?
So what you're saying is that in order for countertransference to affect the first, is it possible for you to just have some negative reaction towards the client without being triggered by them?
Can you have a negative reaction to your client without being triggered by them? I guess I don't know exactly what that means. I think a negative reaction means you're triggered by something. Now, people have given personal examples, or they've responded to the ones I gave, where they think they have a general reaction to this kind of person, regardless of that person's transference. So that's true, but those are exceptions. Those are you note your exceptions. Like some people have a thing for money, some people have a thing for beauty, for Torah, for another therapist, a mental health professional, certain kinds of psychopathology. If I had a very narcissistic parent who really drove me crazy and caused a lot of pain, maybe I'm very aggravated by narcissistic patients. If I had a very dramatic, out of control, dysregulated mother, then maybe borderline women trigger something in me. But that's not really what I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about sort of in your normal professional mode, that this patient is having a strong reaction to you in some way, because that's part of the psychotherapy situation. You're going to have a reaction back. My fashion consultant, Dr. Klein. You're not my fashion colleague. You're my... Right. So I agree. I think that we all are experiencing emotional reactions before we can understand them intellectually or process them. Like by definition, you can't understand it when you're first having it. You can work with it and figure it out over time and eventually understand it. I also think that some patients with primitive personality disorders, borderline patients are a good example, so I don't mean this to just be semantics. I think that those patients are probably inducing projective identifications in you that you're feeling. We're going to talk about that in a few more slides after the break. And yeah, so we're going to talk about that. But these patients are triggering something in Hindi, who through her work over the years has become like a kli to resonate with certain kinds of primitive personalities, and she's having that reaction. But they are triggering you, and it is an early transference, and it's deeply unconscious in them, and they do this with lots of people. Narcissistic patients who are very haughty and arrogant and competitive or aggressive, they are doing stuff to us. They're doing it with their body language and their nonverbals and the way they dress and the way they sit. Like, there is a complex thing going on, which we're going to talk about a little bit. So I think those early reactions still are countertransference, even though and I think it's yes, and so we're in agreement about that. So the last thing we'll do before the break is projective identification. Actually, I think we'll stop here. We'll go on to projective identification after this. We're going to do a 10-minute break, and you don't have to leave the room for the 10-minute break if you don't want to. But you have to come back because this is a really good slide. You injured him.
I injured him, but I
Yeah.
remember the word you used. There's
Yeah.
a conflict. It's like,
All these memories have it.
we're having a great time.
It's so interesting that these memories have it in there. Yeah, it is. Right. Okay, so should we get ready to move on to the next portion? Is anyone right out there? No, you have to see this slide before you go. You really do. You have to see this slide before you go. Yep, you do. Okay, so we're going to talk about projective identification right now. Now, what do you feel? Here's my question for you. What do you feel when you hear a baby crying? What do you feel? Panic? What else? Stress? You don't feel much. Okay. That's not a feeling, Rabbi Union. That's a thought. But we'll come back to you. You work on it. We'll come back to you. Yes. Eager to help. Irritability. Compassion. Depends whose baby it is. I think that especially in women, every baby that you hear cry is your baby for at least a split second. So I think the common answer is terror. That is the common answer of hearing a baby cry, and then aggravation or annoyance is because, like, oh my God, I don't want to deal with this right now. Well, but that's the common answer is terror. Now, I'll tell you that babies are hardwired to cry and fill us with terror. That's how babies were designed. Okay, whether you believe in creationism or evolution with God guiding it, babies are designed, they're hardwired to fill us with terror when they cry. We are hardwired to react with terror to a baby's cry. Now, it's a little bit different now because, If a baby's crying out in the hallway at the Nefesh conference, we don't think that baby's being torn apart by wild animals or out in the cold. But when you don't know what the situation of that baby is and you hear a baby crying, you're going to feel terror. It's hunger, cold, danger. That's what we assume is going on. We don't assume. It's like that's a very primitive reaction, not just in human beings. Babies that don't cry and fill us with terror, I bet they never lived and reproduced. And adults who don't feel terror when their babies cry, other than Rabbi Union apparently, they probably have fewer or no surviving descendants. I mean, like this is who survived. This instinct, okay, caring for young, dependent young who are in need, like this is a core, fundamental human reaction that is in it. This was a reaction before we were human beings, like whatever we were before, Homo erectus and Australopithecus. Like I'm sure their babies cried and filled them with terror, and they made sure their babies were not being attacked by lizards or wolves or something. This has shaped our evolution into a highly social, interconnected human nature. Now, we communicate our emotions non-verbally. You know, like in the West and among Jews, we think about now you guys are therapists, so we're more sophisticated than this, but a lot of Western educated people really think about things verbally. They think about content and communication as words that are spoken. But most of our emotions, many of our emotions are communicated non-verbally. They're in our expressions, they're in our body language, they're in the cadence of our breath, they're in the tone of our voice, they're in what we don't say, they're in the pregnant pauses between things, they're in inflection. I mean, that's where more emotion, it's like, look at text messages. They had to put emojis in to fill in for like all the stuff that's missing from the texts. And, you know, emotion is mostly, you could watch a lot of movies without understanding the language, and you could tell pretty much what's going on just from the affect. Unconscious communication is an absolutely real thing. We often have emotions that we're unaware of, and we are communicating them inadvertently, even though we don't know that we are. If you are trying not to look nervous, or you don't know that you're nervous, people pick up your nervous vibes. And we also pick up on people's emotions without even knowing that we are. You know, you will notice something out of the corner of your eye that just catches your attention. You're like, what is going on? You don't know what it is, but there's something resonating with you. So unconscious communication is where affect, without knowing it, am communicating affect to you, and you're picking it up without knowing it. These are real things that happen. Yes. So, all right, so this is interesting. So one of my supervisors, Allah Hashalom Mia Biran, who is Israeli, as you can tell, she believed very strongly, she didn't believe in like anything supernatural that's Jewish, but she believed in this very strongly, that you can actually communicate a thought. So I think that when you're unconsciously communicating a thought, what I think is usually happening is you may know the person pretty well, or you just have such a good empathic, attuned sense as to what's going on that, like, we know what thoughts come with lots of emotions. It's like, you know, someone comes in the room and says something, and we're going to all have, like, might all have the same thought at the same time. I think there are just certain generalities of human experience that are so close to one another that when there's unconscious communication of a thought, I think it's part of like the human condition that we're all so attuned to. And I don't really think that there's some sort of, I don't think there's something, it's not telepathic, right. And also there are many emotions that just automatically lead to thoughts. They're automatic thoughts, right? I mean, if you're a CBT person, automatic thoughts are symptoms of affects and emotions. So I think that with certain emotions being communicated, there are thoughts that go along with them that almost everybody's going to have. That's what I think of that. Melanie Klein noted what we're talking about right now, unconscious communication, nonverbal communication. She noted this to be a defense in very primitive adult patients and also in children. It's a way that we can rid ourselves of unwanted emotions. Now, what's a really common example? If you're very, very aggravated about something, okay, let's say you're sitting in a session and Dr. Klafter says something that is so annoying, which, of course, that's not going to happen, but we're going to use a very fictitious example. So I say something that's so annoying, you need someone else to be annoyed by that. Like, you need someone to sort of carry the burden with you. You know, like, misery loves company is probably an expression that's related to this in some way. When you're scared, if you're on a plane and you hear a bad noise, okay, you need someone else to hear that bad noise. Like, you can't be the only one carrying this emotional burden. Melanie Klein noted that when people have some sort of really toxic, unwanted affect, emotion inside of them, they have ways of, like, getting other people to feel it. It's infectious. It's like the bad feelings that I have ways of, like, it becomes contagious and I get other people, and that relieves me of this feeling. It relieves me of this feeling in this way. There is a very important derivative of this theory by Wilfred Bion that we'll talk with. He talked about something called the container and the contained. What happens in situations where patients come in and they're full of primitive emotions and feelings, and you just get, like, Hindi gave a good example. Like, in the first 20 minutes of meeting someone, she feels sick to her stomach. And she's often going to find out that that person has a certain type of problem that she just finds very difficult and tense to deal with. When patients do this to us, when patients sort of, like, fill us with sort of, like, unspeakable, difficult to understand emotions and feelings, Bion's concept is the following: that you have to become the container for their emotions that they can't contain. And then your job is going to be that, like, you're going to process those emotions that they're putting into you, and you're going to work on these for a long time. You're going to make sense of them, and you're going to translate them back to the person. And then that person starts to develop a mind to handle their emotions. Now, let me think of an example. A patient comes in having been berated by his mother, and he's just absolutely livid and angry. And he leaves his house, and he vandalizes a fence. And then he kicks an animal. And then he spits on another kid. Then he gets to school and bullies another kid. And then he gets to your office, and he's still wound up, and he's so angry. He's been in detention. Another kid punched him back. He has a bloody nose or a broken nose. And he's just full of rage. If you would say to him, you know, Rabbi Union, what happened today that you feel this way? Okay, if you would say that, you know, Rabbi Union doesn't have the presence of mind to say, my mother is so narcissistic, and no one had, that person is just, he doesn't know why he feels this way. He doesn't know what he feels. But I'll tell you what you're going to feel. You're going to feel scared, confused, weird, angry, worried. You're not going to know what's going on. You're going to be filled with some sort of, like, confusing feeling. And the first 10 times the patient does it to you, you're not going to know what's going on. The 11th time, you're going to, okay, I think I understand something going on. Like, this has happened before. And the last time this happened, we learned that you had been berated and slapped in the face in front of your friends by your mother. Did something happen like that today? Did anything happen today that's treating you this way? He truly doesn't know what happened or why he felt this way. But you're starting to make sense of it. You're serving as the container, but he has not communicated anything to you in, like, an overt, verbal, linear, coherent way. You are just feeling these feelings for whatever now, they're not magical. It's not magical. This is like, again, we pick up on people's emotions, but it gets inside of you. it causes you to feel a lot of distress, and you can start to make sense of it. Over the course of therapy, as you make sense of his emotions and you give it back to him in a more coherent form, he learns to make sense of his affects and his feelings. He learns to manage his relationships with people. He learns to manage his relationship with his mother. This is years of work. This doesn't happen in a few months. This happens in 5 to 10 years, people who have these kinds of primitive problems. But a lot of the work is actually emotional. A lot of that work is that you have to sort of like let yourself get bombarded with these uncomfortable feelings and make sense of them. And, you know, one of the analogies that I heard from one of my supervisors is that it's like young chicks can't swallow a worm. They need the mother chick to like chew up the worm and feed them the worm in a way that they can digest it. That's what the emotions are like. It's like they can't digest these emotions. You put it into some kind of form that's less scary, more orderly, makes sense, and then you can sort of like piece by piece give it back to the person in a verbal, coherent way, and you make sense of it. You don't really make sense. I was going to say you make sense of it together. You don't make sense of it together. You make sense of it for yourself because you're coping with your own emotion, and then you start to share that with the person, and each time you do that, they get a little bit more of a mature adult mind from you. That's kind of the process of working with primitive people. It isn't that they come in and give you a narrative and you make an interpretation. They come in unable to give you a narrative, and you pick up on their emotions and you figure out a narrative. It's with mentalization, it's with empathy, it's with processing your countertransference, it's with savoring your projective identifications, and you start to make something that makes sense to them. And over the years of that work, you help them evolve an adult mind to process their emotions. That's kind of the work of projective identification. I hope there are some questions or thoughts in this, because I just said a bunch of stuff. We'll start with Hindi. Well, I said it how I see it. So the splitting off from the self and putting, like, we're using metaphors because these are really primitive emotional things that don't really have words that can describe them. They're pre-verbal. So this metaphor, if it's split off from the self and put into, I'm just kind of describing the phenomenology, is it's chaotic, crazy, unpleasant, scary, distressing feelings that you start to feel because of how they're behaving. A very distressing, a very disturbed person, here's a disturbed person is disturbing, okay? When someone is very disturbed, it's disturbing to you and you feel disturbed. That is projective identification. What Hindi's talking is a Kleinian theory of like how it's done. To me, that's like a mushel, and I don't find it all that helpful. She's accurately portraying it. I find my experience of it helpful. We don't have good words to describe what the person is going through. And I don't think it's split off from the self. I think it's never been integrated into the self because there isn't a self that can handle it. So it's like in a state, you'd have to have an adult mind with a self that can understand and contain these emotions. This is like a primitive mind that has never been able to contain these things. So they're not even split off. It's like they never entered in the first place. That's how I think of it. It's a little bit of a different theory. I'll get to you, but there were some thoughts on the side. Yes?
Describing the process as a therapist here, what the client say, and distinguish that therapist is actually coming to the conclusion on his own, or his or her own, as to what's happening, processing it for the client, and then giving it back to them. So it sounds like there's not really a lot of collaboration as to what's really going on. The therapist coming to his or her own conclusion and telling the client. One thing that might affect, the client accepting what the therapist is saying, as opposed to if that,
Okay, so it's a good question. So the way I describe this, it sounds like I'm doing all the work for the patient, and the patient has to kind of like accept what I say. So that's a good question. I'll tell you my understanding of this. Over time, as the patient gets healthier, there's more and more collaboration. This is a patient that's not capable of collaborating, and this is a patient that's in such a distressed, disturbed, primitive state that the patient has there's not going to be an issue like, oh, the patient is going to be resistant to my interpretation because they want to save their autonomy. This is a patient that's in a crisis. And the proof of whether this is true is whether my narrative of understanding alleviates the crisis. In other words, the patient's not going to say, oh, you're right, and I never thought of that. That's like way beyond, that's like a neurotic patient in CBT or something. This is someone who can start to be sane and not look psychotic anymore. This is someone who stops hyperventilating. This is someone who can now look at you in the eyes and looks like less disturbed. This is someone who will stop sweating so much. This is someone who can now assume like a better posture in the chair. So you will just see that like the organism, this person is like calming, getting grounded, getting more centered, and that's the proof that this is working. Over time, this will become collaborative, and then you actually have a much healthier person who's working with you. And then this person will do it without you, and we're getting ready to end therapy. But that's like a process of years. So we're not even at the level of agreement or disagreement. It's almost like, it's almost like working with a baby. The baby's crying. Are you hungry or are you cold? I'm going to figure this out. You give the baby a bottle, the baby's not hungry. You put a blanket on the baby, swaddle the baby calms down. So I was right the second of it. The baby didn't say, you got it wrong, doc, and I'm sick of your interpretations. The baby can't. So this person is in sort of like that state, like an infant baby that can't really verbalize. Yes, they're also adults. They're to some degree autonomous adults, but in this state, they're really so regressed. So we're talking about something where I think it doesn't rise to the level of agreement or acceptance. That's later on. Yes. Well, I think that this type of patient, fortunately, is not a super common patient in our practices. I mean, we can only handle like maybe 2 or 3 maximum at once. Some people only 1 at once. And so I would have said it's 5 to 10 years of work. And I think that if you see people only 3 to 5 years maximum, you're probably not seeing a lot of people like this. If you were seeing people like this, you would see them longer because they would still need treatment longer. So I think the treatment sort of, the duration of treatment is dictated by the work that needs to be done. And if you had a lot of people like this, you would see them longer. Look, some of us have a few patients we see for 18, 20, 25 years. We do see people like that. Hopefully they've evolved a lot over that time. But we do see a few people very, very long term. But to move from, being in this primitive state, I think it's 5 to 10 years of work on average. Some people sooner, might do it in 3. I don't think anyone does it in 1 or 2 years, by the way, but I think maybe 3. But 5 to 10, some people it takes 15 or 20. Some people don't get better. Some people, God forbid, commit suicide. I mean, the outcomes are, but as a general rule, I mean, this is like a chunk of their life. Like we're trying to, this is a chunk of their life that they will need therapy for a really long period of time. That's the sort of the ballpark. Mark?
So this is like oncology. I'm just thinking about your internal experience. It's like a thankless job.
I like it. It's a good job.
I know, that's my next question. So for most of us, we don't like that, I think. So how do we manage the internal with the
No, I don't think so. I think most therapists have, every therapist encounters patients like this, and most therapists work with patients like this, but nowadays most therapists don't have the training to engage in such a emotionally primitive nonverbal process. It's like they're trained in like one of the 3-letter modalities, and it's like, look, I'm trying to do CBT with you, and you're coming in beaten up with and hyperventilating. So like, or I'm trying to do IFS with you, but you won't talk with me about parts. Like you're trying to do work and you're trying to get into a modality that's like, they're helpful modalities, but certain patients are just, they're too disturbed still to be able to do that modality. So I think that we do treat these people, and we do I think that most therapists have people that are this primitive and they have relationships with them. And the relationships are somewhat helpful, but if you can work in this area, I think it can be more helpful. But I don't think it takes a special, I don't agree with that. I think that the typical therapist can be trained to do this work. I actually do believe that. I think it requires the support of a supervisor that knows how to do this work. It takes training that's beyond what's in most training programs. And then the accepting that like there are certain people that, they're better while they're seeing you. The fact that they're like in a relationship with you makes them somewhat healthier, but to have like permanent long-term change is going to take several years, and to not feel like you're doing something wrong. I think that requires a lot of additional professional support that we don't have out of most of our training programs. Yes. No, this is not psychoanalytic. This is a once or twice a week therapy for 5 to 10 years. I don't think most people here are, becoming psychoanalysts and seeing people 4 times a week. And most of these patients would find the analytic situation too distressing. Like this is not considered to be psychoanalytic treatment. This is intensive, supportive, expressive psychotherapy. And, I think this is probably twice a week is going to be more helpful. There's a lot more support. You might end up seeing someone 3 times. I think a lot of therapists see some people 3 times a week for a while when they're in a very, very regressed mode. So these are people that you might see, in a crisis 3 times a week or every day, and then they go back to once or twice a week other times. But it's really that in psychoanalysis, you deliberately engineer 4 times a week because you're trying to create a situation where they can work through neurotic defenses. This is not a neurotic patient, and so the number of times a week is going to be driven by like the stability and the need in that moment. But it may be that twice a week is like a better baseline than once a week. We all have constraints. We work in clinics. We have supervisors that might not support that, or they have insurance companies. But I don't know how, but there's there's from therapy economics that I don't understand. And people seem to, one way or another, get treatment that they need. Yes?
So I was just curious, would you consider this process as sort of engaging in introspection on behalf of the patient with the goal of them eventually developing maybe ability to do themselves?
Yeah, that's one way to say it. I think so. You're vicariously introspecting. You're using your empathic understanding to help them understand what's going on with their emotions. And then they start to take ownership of that over time, gradually. And then you will become a collaborator, and then hopefully not needed so much. And then you're working on termination. I think that is the way I like that. I'm going to steal that. That's like a nice overview of sort of how treatment works. Any other questions on this slide, or we'll move on? Yes? Well, okay, so the question is, does this only apply to more primitive patients, or does it apply in a more moderate way to everyone? I think it applies in a more moderate way to everyone, because you are using, everyone engages in projective identifications. It's sort of like a universal way of relating to other people. And everyone requires an empathic understanding, because everyone has emotional difficulties that they're not aware of, and that's what we're trying to do in this kind of work. So it applies to everyone, but The people who come in a very disturbed way, where you're mostly using projective identification to understand what happened like all the time, those are people in borderline and severe narcissistic states, or maybe severe avoidant personality, severe depression, because people when they're severely depressed are, it's not a personality disorder, but while they're in a severe depression, it's just like having a severe personality disorder because they're in a compromised state. There are a lot of severe anxiety, people in the middle of panic attacks that have frequent panic attacks. While they're in that state, they're really not functioning with with their normal. I'm sure, I'm not going to ask people to show hands. I'm sure many people in this room have had panic attacks before. And in the middle of a panic attack, like, you're not a normal person when you're in the middle of a panic attack. So I think it's relevant to all people, but very primitive people where that's the regular work, that's a special case of this type of work. So I was using those patients to illustrate what this process is. But I think it's, as you said, in healthier people, we do this with everyone. And, it's really more than a defense. It's a form of interpersonal connection. One of the ways we relate to people is just unconsciously connecting emotionally with other people. That is how we get along with other humans. I want to talk about the concepts of role responsiveness and enactment. So the thinker that came up with this idea, role responsiveness, is Joseph Sandler. And so he did a number of investigations into projective identification. He was also a Kleinian analyst in London. This should say the patient has internalized his or her prior relationships as a role fantasy. What do I mean by that? Let's say that you were an abandoned child, that really happened to you. Or let's say that you were a jilted lover as a very young person. Or let's say that you felt like a lonely reject, okay? Now, none of us have not felt all these things, okay? We've all felt this way, like these ways to some degree. But let's say that this is really, in some very formative relationships, this is what you felt like. So that patient subsequently will construct a fantasy of roles in different types of relationships as a defense against those painful, unwanted memories. What do I mean? I'll be the rescued child. Like, my fantasy is that, like, I'm not the stepdaughter that gets ignored, but I'm going to be Cinderella at the ball. I'm going to be the rescued child. Or I'm going to be the rescued damsel in distress. I'm going to be saved. So I will find a way to, like, faint in front of someone who's going to catch me and save me this time. And that's the fantasy that I have as an adult. Or I'm going to become a passionate lover. Or I'm going to be a popular, charismatic star. And I will not feel like a lonely reject anymore. So people construct a new role. And then what they do is what they do is they try to, enact that role on other people. So you have someone who tries very hard, for example, to seduce you. I think on some level feels like an ignored, lonely, unnoticed person. And I think that seduction, is a way of undoing that. They're trying to, enact this new role. Now, when people put pressure on us to treat them in this, other sort of role way, I think I'm stepping on a cord and knocking something, sorry. What is our response if someone, tries to make you mommy them, tries to force you to nurture them? What is the normal response? The normal response is you're going to mommy them. That's actually what we do. That's normal. That's what people do. You might eventually get sick of it once you realize what's going on. So resist it, that's after you've already done it a bunch of times and you're starting to get old. But that we actually conform to the roles people want of us naturally. That's what we do. We don't know what's happening. But people, the people that try to hold court, we listen to someone who wants to hold court. Or people who want to... whatever they're trying to do, your initial reaction is you're going to enact that role. That happens in life in general. It's normal, and it also happens in therapy. We enact the role we're pressured into adopting, and we do this before we realize it or understand that we're doing it. So patients will force you to act a certain way, and you're going to do it. If your supervisor criticizes you for doing that, you need a new supervisor. Your supervisor's job is to help you understand what's going on and help you free yourself from it. But like, you didn't do something wrong. You wouldn't help them more if you just automatically become a cold jerk when they try to get you to be nurturing and loving. If they continue to do it and wear you out, then you need to get freed of this problem, and you might need the supervisors to help free you. But you have done nothing wrong. It would be wrong to not be nurturing and understanding and caring. That's your normal initial response. You have a puzzled look on your face. You don't like this. What's going on? And I'm hurt by that already. Go ahead. Okay, so the question is, do you notice it and try to talk about it, or do you just go with it? So, no, what I'm saying is that you did this already for many weeks in a row before you even knew you were doing it. All of a sudden, like, you are bringing out a milk and cookies and a new pillow for this patient. You don't do it for anyone else, and you're just, all of a sudden, you're presenting a case, so you're like, oh my gosh, what the heck am I doing? I sound like an idiot. Why am I doing this with this patient? Okay, I have a patient who is a nun who lives in a convent, and I was serving her like these gourmet coffees with tons and tons of creamer and flavor, and I felt like such a fool that I was doing this. And I discussed it with a really good supervisor. He said, yeah, you are really bothered by her deprivation, and she sees in you, and anyone who knows me doesn't worry about me depriving myself of things, right? Like, I'm not a deprived person. So, like, that's what she likes about you. She's like, that's what she's getting out of this, is that you celebrate the self. You celebrate, like, self-care. You celebrate this. She loves this, and you're doing this with her. I didn't stop doing it once I realized it. What'd you say? Well, yes, we eventually put it out the dynamic, but, like, with someone, you can't just suddenly talk about it and stop doing it. You've gotten yourself into a whole thing with someone. Like, you're in a whole enactment. It's like, no, I'm not giving you coffee anymore. Like, it's not going to do anything, and it's not really yet in a mode you can discuss it. Like, you have to work on it and understand what's going on inside of you. Now, if you're doing something that's, I don't think it's such a problem. I give this poor nun coffee. It's like the one pleasure she has, once a week. It's fine. So I don't think, like, nothing bad happened in the universe because of that, and we still did our professional work. But it was an enactment. So the term for this is an enactment. I enacted the role that she was pressuring me into. And we do this with people. We absolutely do this with people. All of you do this with people, whether you know it or not. And so the thing is to realize you're doing it, and then the work that you do with it, yes, eventually we'll understand that. And we do. We do talk about the fact that she was a deeply deprived woman. She grew up in a very poor home. She actually, in the middle of therapy, realized, she was talking about how when she was little, she lived under a tree for 2 years in Texas. And she realized she was homeless for 2 years. Her family was homeless for 2 years. And she never realized, she never used the word homeless. And she tried to cultivate a sense of self that she doesn't need anything. And she took a vow of holy poverty and lived in a convent, like slept on a board for years and years, and like lived in this abject holy state of holy poverty. And she got somehow hooked up with Klafter, who doesn't believe in holy poverty. And so we have talked about this, but like, I did that before I understood what was going on. Like, I enacted this role of like giving her this, like, you give her like breast milk. I mean, coffee with lots of milk and flavor. Like, I breastfed her my coffee. That's what I did with her for like a year before I knew that I was doing it. I just thought, oh, I'll do this. She comes at the time of the day that I need coffee. I'm giving her coffee. What's going to happen? But I didn't understand that was going on for a long time. And then, Dr. Ed Cohen talked about it with me, and we realized what was going on. But I had to see that I was doing this before I could work it out with her. So, no, it wasn't therapeutic that I did that. I didn't decide to do that. But I found myself doing that, and then I worked with it later. So, all right, all the enactments are unconscious. These are unconscious enactments. Yes? Is the goal to stop the enactment behavior, be aware of what's going on? It's probably usually helpful to stop the enactment, but I wouldn't say it's the goal to stop the enactment. The goal is to help the patient get better. So you're making use of this thing that you got yourself into. You're basically noticing that the patient pressured you into a role. You succumbed to the role. It wasn't like a bad thing. I wouldn't violate major rules. I mean, it's weird to give your patient coffee, maybe a little, but we all do stuff like this. And there's no boundary violations. There's no problem. She was still in therapy getting better. And then I realized, okay, why am I doing this? This is something I don't do with other people. There's one other person I did this with. It was a 16-year-old suicidal patient who said she will only see me if I promise to give her coffee every time she sees me. If I don't give her coffee, she's never going to see me again. And I really believe she was suicidal, and I made a promise I will give her coffee, and she saw me. I did that consciously, deliberately. I don't think that was an enactment. She was an acting out adolescent, I did it. But with my nun, I did it. It wasn't that she demanded it. I just found myself doing this in some way. So I made use of that material to understand her. That's sort of, but it's, whether you stop the enactment is sort of, it ends up being, you probably usually stop the enactment because it's unnecessary. And now she's on Zoom because her convent moved her to another place and she can't commute. But you probably usually stop the enactment. But I don't think that's the point. That's like sort of a separate issue. And sometimes stopping the enactment will be disruptive, and you have to do some psychotherapy work about the issue before, they have to understand that it was an enactment. And this is complicated, weird ideas. So it takes a while before the patient can even have that talk with you. So you don't stop the enactment unless you have to, or it's now irrelevant through the work. I hope that answered your question. Yes? Okay, so the question is, if you're going to enact the roles of what patients are pressuring you to do, how do you avoid fostering a dependency? So it's a good question. It requires a few points to answer, though. The first point is that you don't decide to do this. You're not deciding to do this. So there's no making sure of anything because you're doing something that you're not intending to do. You're doing something you did not intend to do. You found yourself doing this. So you can't make sure that it isn't a problem because you didn't try to do it in the first place. It's like you unconsciously fell into this pattern with the patient. So there's really no way of making sure of anything. Presenting your work to supervisors, talking about what you do, never violating actual ethics or boundaries, making sure people pay you, not letting them run up a bill, we have lots of things, you have guardrails in place. I don't think giving coffee, accepting a minor gift, I don't think any of these things are thought of as being so unusual anymore. We're not so rigid with every little thing anymore because it usually causes more trouble than it helps. So we find ourselves in an enactment, and that's kind of how we engage in the therapy. So that you can't make sure of something. What you can make sure of is that you never violate your licensure rules or your boundaries. Those are easy to keep in mind. Giving coffee is not a boundary violation, or it's a boundary crossing, not a violation. No one's being exploited. It's just symbolically meaningful. And I was doing it because of the symbolic meaning. And then I work on it and think about it. And I actually didn't bother stopping it because I didn't think it stopped on its own because of external reasons. Any other points? Okay. I'm going to go on to narcissism. Now I'm talking about narcissism in us, ultimately, okay? We'll talk about it in general. But narcissism, it means three things. There's a normal need and mental energy spent on cultivating a sense of oneself as attractive, significant and important, intelligent, lovable, loved. And we try to avoid feeling the opposite, ugly, insignificant, stupid, unlovable. Okay, everyone has to spend mental energy on cultivating these feelings and avoiding the last row. That is normal in all human beings. There's no one that doesn't have those needs. It's not a goal to not have those needs. That is just normal part of being a person, and we all have to regulate our self-esteem. That is just normal human functioning. And narcissism, one definition of narcissism is the mental energy we spend on doing this. That's normal narcissism. The next definition of narcissism is a pathological state where one needs to do desperate things due to self-esteem being dysregulated and out of balance. Okay, so when you say someone is narcissistic, you probably mean this person has such a dysregulated self-esteem that they have to engage in desperate behavior, and we see them doing like desperate, grandiose, attention-seeking stuff that like is bothersome or so attention-seeking, and we see them doing this in order to regulate their self-esteem. They have to always win. They have to always look perfect. They have to always be the best. They put other people down. They get envious of people. They get jealous of people. They have an I in Ra. They can't enjoy another person's success because they think it reflects poorly on them. A pathological state of being desperate to regulate your self-esteem. So it's confusing when I talk about, my narcissism or your narcissism. You might think I'm accusing you of being in this state, but I'm actually talking about this normal stuff inside of you. So the term narcissism is confusing because we use it in these different ways. And then the third definition is it's a very specific pathological personality type, like the DSM narcissistic personality disorder. That's another way we use the term, like an exaggerated caricature of point 2 above. By the way, Heinz Kohut talked about narcissistic personality disorders, that there are many types of narcissistic personality disorders. He considered avoidant personality to also be a narcissistic personality disorder, because avoidant personality is about regulating and protecting your self-esteem to avoid rejection, failure, humiliation. But it isn't that cocky, grandiose, arrogant NPD, but Heinz Kohut called all the personality disorders that are about regulating your self-esteem narcissistic disorders. So nowadays it means this one disorder, the cocky, haughty, arrogant Balgaiva that is described in the DSM. It's become, I think narcissism now is the ultimate dirty word and insult. Like in the last 10 to 15 years, that's the worst thing you can say about someone is that, you're a narcissist. It's just the worst thing you can say. When I was in training, it wasn't. When I was in training, the ultimate insult was borderline. That's the worst thing in the world. And it was like, everybody's narcissistic. What, like, you don't care about your intelligence? You don't want to be a good professional? You don't want to be attractive? You're not insecure from time to time? You don't get competitive when we all accepted that narcissism is just sort of normal, professional, educated Western people want to feel significant, loved, important, confident, and it was not seen as such a horrible idea. It's really interesting to me that it's been sort of tainted in the popular non-professional media to be the worst thing, and now it's come back to us, and it's like very hard to diagnose someone with narcissistic personality. I can easily tell a patient that he or she suffers from borderline personality disorder. It's going to be a really good day. I'm going to meet with the whole family. We're going to have a double session. I'm going to explain what it is. It's going to explain all their problems for the first time that no one ever got right. I'm going to have books for them to read, including the book, I Hate You, Don't Love Me. Not Stop Walking on Eggshells. That's a mean, terrible book. Or No More Walking. I don't like that book. It's a mean book. But I like I Hate You, Don't Leave Me. But try diagnosing someone nowadays with narcissistic personality disorder. We can't do it anymore. Like, that is such an insult. So it's a shame what's happened in the world with this. Narcissistic injuries I want to review. So this is my patient's definition of a narcissistic injury. He has given me permission to use it. He wants me to use his name, but I'm not going to use his name. Well, narcissistic injury. Tell me if you're impressed. It's when something happens that makes you feel so bad about yourself that you do whatever you need to numb your pain, and because you are so busy taking care of yourself, you end up mistreating or being oblivious to what other people need from you or how your behavior is impacting them. Isn't that a great definition? It's like the best definition. Yeah. He really knows this stuff from firsthand experience. Oh, I'm looking at the advanced slide. Okay, there you go. You know, he didn't come up with this like his first 5 years of therapy. You know what I mean? He did a lot of work to get there. Yeah. So what I want to say is that patients can cause narcissistic injuries in the therapist. They can. We are, even though they are much more vulnerable to us than we are to them, we are very vulnerable about our professional skills. We don't like feeling uninsightful, unempathic, cold, impatient, unattuned. And when patients make us feel that way, it can be a narcissistic injury. They dismiss our advice. They insult us or our professional skills. They skip therapy. It is a vulnerability for all therapists, narcissistic injury in your work. And it clouds our judgment and our perceptiveness to our patients when we have been narcissistically injured. It cannot really be prevented or avoided. You can't prevent yourself from having narcissistic injuries. There's just no way to do that. You can work on yourself so that you can recover from narcissistic injuries and not be so off balance. And that's, again, I think it's actually supervision more than therapy, to tell you the truth. And I'll talk about that toward the end. We get better at acknowledging this over time as we become less narcissistically vulnerable over time. So we're better at acknowledging it and we recover faster. But no one is immune to narcissistic injuries. It would be a mythical creature that's immune to it. And it's interesting, the more narcissistic the more pathologically narcissistic someone is, the more oblivious they are to their narcissistic injuries. They just think that they're responding in a normal way. They don't realize they're lashing out in a nasty, mean way. They think that they're doing something appropriate, which is in kind. And I want to talk about attachment distress. I'm not going to review attachment theory. Everybody knows the basics of attachment distress. Attachment distress is the distress and negative emotions we feel when we sense that our attachments are threatened or disrupted. So reactions vary with the attachment styles, but all attachment distress is aimed at either re-securing the attachment that we've lost or coping with the distress caused by the disruption. That's what attachment distress is. So, what do borderline patients do when they feel attachment distress? How do they cope? Yes?
Call you over and over again. They come to your office and shouldn't be there. And they blame you for this and that.
That's a healthier borderline patient. That's a patient that you're helping already. What about they threaten suicide? That's less healthy. That's also less healthy. There's self-harm. What they also do is they hate the person. They move from loving the person that they don't want to lose to hating them, which is called splitting. They imagine that person who they're losing or afraid of losing is an evil monster that they're better off getting rid of. That's actually how borderline people, that's like pathognomonic, even more than self-harm for borderline personality, is splitting. I'm going to turn you into a horrible monster in my mind. You know, Mark Banchik, you were never really my friend. You were just using me. You were just lying to me. So that's one of the ways that borderline patients cope with attachment distress. And then the other things are, I mean, self-harm is actually a form of splitting too. It's complicated how that works, but we won't get into it now. And then frantically clinging, that's the other thing that borderline patients do. But that's actually a little bit healthier in a weird way. It's not more pleasant for us. We'd rather have them fire us and hate us. Avoidant patients. What do avoidant patients do when they suffer from attachment distress? Retreat, pull back, yeah. They avoid any risk of rejection. They become more secluded and isolated. And what do people generally do? They do mind-numbing behaviors. They drink, they smoke, they become hypersensitive, they seek out other friendships, they seek out other relationships, they rebound, whether they're appropriate or not. So what do therapists do? Therapists, during their times of attachment distress, they become more sensitive, they become more needy, they become more impatient with their patients. There are studies of boundary violations that occur between therapists and their patients, and they're very frequent. Well, I can't say they're very frequent, of people that have committed boundary violations that are not like predators that do it all the time. It's typical that it happens during a divorce, during the death of a loved one. It happens when people are at their most lonely and vulnerable, and that's when they're the most, at risk for violating boundaries. But even that's an extreme case. We're just not on our game. We're not on our game. We're really impatient. We get annoyed. We can't handle as much of the patient's emotions. So when our relationships are disrupted in our regular lives, we're not as good in the consulting room. And we need extra help. Extra help in therapy, extra help. We need friends that we can turn to. We need to really take care of that. It's like a professional, it's just like if you were a personal trainer and you have a sprain. What are you going to do when you have a sprain as a personal trainer? You've got to do something about it, So the more subtle and more frequent things, when patients act rejecting, dismissive, we actually feel subtle attachment distress sometimes from patients when they're very rejecting of us. It's an interesting thing. Like, we don't want to believe that we do, but our patients are, we're not as vulnerable to them as they are to us, but we are somewhat vulnerable to them, and we can be hurt by when our patients dismiss us, not just a narcissistic injury, but also like that loss of the connection with the patient can affect therapists. And, I don't think it's going to throw most therapists into a crisis, a mental health crisis in some way, but I think that it will maybe throw you off. You'll be less empathically attuned. You'll be less patient. You'll be more likely to charge. You'll be more dismissive. You'll make a wisecrack that isn't sort of funny. It's like kind of mean. If you found yourself ever like making a joke to a patient, it's like, oh, that was mean. That like wasn't a nice joke. Usually I make nice jokes. That was not a nice joke. Like that's the kind of thing you'll do when you feel hurt by a patient. Want to talk about diagnosis. Is anyone here of the opinion that diagnosis is not helpful, that it's harmful, and you don't make diagnoses of your patients? Anyone practice that way? One very reluctant woman in the middle barely raised her hands. A proud person behind you, raise your hand. Oh, but that's not, okay, but that's like tactics. But it's helpful to you to know this person suffers from an addiction. Like you're making the diagnosis, you're just not sharing the diagnosis. It's a strategy. That's not what I mean. I mean, like, does the concept of diagnosis, does anyone adhere to a philosophy of treatment that the concept of diagnosis is inherently disruptive to the therapeutic relation or the treatment process?
It can't be if they're not therapeutic regimen. So by you saying it, they're going to be
No, again, I'm not talking about saying it. I'm talking about thinking it. Does this is something different? So two of you are saying you think it's a problem to think in terms of diagnosis with your patient. That's what you think. You think too much. You think it'd be helpful. You're doing this.
sometimes it is helpful, sometimes you don't want to come in with an open mind, you don't make assumptions. That way you'll pick up on things that you can pick up on.
Okay, but again though, if the risk is I'll get the diagnosis wrong, then you ultimately believe in diagnosis. Yeah, so you're going to comment on why you believe diagnosis is inherently problematic? A what way? A broken way of looking at people, right. Okay, in the back. In your mind or what you say to the patient? Both, okay. Interesting. Okay, I hear that. I don't think I know your name, woman in the black. Oh, go ahead. What did you say? Oh, okay. I was actually joking around with someone else who I know very well, but it looked like I was pointing to you. But did you have a comment you also wanted to make, or? No, okay, I'm sorry. It looked like I was pointing to you. I was pointing to Alana Rosen. I do know your name. Yes, what are you going to say, Alana? Right. Right. Okay. So I believe in diagnosis. I absolutely believe in diagnosis. I don't believe it's not helpful to the treatment process. I understand that there are stigmas about diagnoses, and I understand that it can be dehumanizing or limiting or reductionistic if we don't understand it. But I believe that people come to us with really severe problems, and they're not the same as one another, and that we characterize the problems because they help us focus on what's wrong, and there are techniques that work for some problems and not for others, and characterizing the problem and knowing the type of technique that helps it is what diagnosis is. So like I absolutely do believe in diagnosis, but I like hearing people's thoughts about this. I'm a doctor, I was trained in the medical model, but so I do use diagnosis, and I don't know how I could do the work I do without diagnosis, because I really am trying to focus on exactly what's wrong. What has to be different? What makes this person unable to do what he or she needs to do? What makes this person unable to live his or her life the way that would make him or her happy? What is wrong, and how are we going to fix it? To me, that's the essence of what diagnosis means. So I don't find it dehumanizing or limiting. I find it to be descriptive and helpful. And as long as we continue to see a whole person with many things, and they're not only their diagnosis, but this diagnosis helps characterize this problem at this time. Yes? Oh, definitely. I would like to share it with every client. The clients that are hard to now are people with narcissistic problems, because the surrounding culture has made it such a sinful, it's like a curse, like you're cursed if you're narcissistic. But I absolutely believe in sharing the diagnosis. Borderline personality and helpful, I find the most helpful diagnosis to share. The most helpful diagnosis to share, because it explains so much of what the person is struggling through. and why the therapy is going to be helpful in what we're working on, and that there are so many other people that have similar problems, and they've been misled with so many poor diagnoses and diagnosed with so many things that are not true over time that haven't helped. So I think it's like really, and this is finally, I mean, borderline personality is a very complex developmental disorder that, you know, has a lot of description and wisdom behind describing it. So I think there's a lot there that people benefit from understanding the diagnosis. Yes. I changed your mind and now you like diagnosis.
No, I still don't.
Okay.
Not that it was, but I wanted to please, but I'm not the best at articulating, so I'll do my best. But I think you even mentioned this, being a doctor and going the medical route. I do believe in a medical diagnosis, and I do believe that treatment is best medically when there's a specific diagnosis and it's treating patients. I think that it really depends on the clinician because sometimes, especially in behavioral health and mental health, if you have to kind of rule out medical to make sure that you can get some of the other, you know, emotional and social. So, I mean, not being a doctor, just being a social worker, I guess I stay clear from diagnosis. Like, if there is a diagnosis, I would like to, like, rule out medical and understand what the diagnosis is from a medical background. But as a social worker, I kind of go the route of behavioral and general and not diagnosis. So that's
Right.
why my practice is open.
So there's the way that the DSM recommends we arrive. Well, everyone knows who J.P. Morgan was? So he said there's two reasons a person does something. There's the right reason and the real reason. That's what he said. Actually, he said there's two reasons a man does something. He didn't say person. He said that's the exact quote, but it applies to everyone. So there's two ways to make a diagnosis. There's the way the DSM says we're supposed to, the real, and then the way we really do. The way the DSM recommends we arrive at a diagnosis, there's like a symptom checklist. And we do very careful interviewing, and we get collateral information. And we might even do some standardized questionnaires or psychological testing. But, you know, we go through this process, semi-structured interview, and we see whether it matches up. No one does it that way. There's very good research about how experienced clinicians make diagnoses, and they have very quick emotional reactions to patients, and they make a diagnosis very quickly. That's actually how they use their emotional response to patients, and that's how they diagnose. And it's highly accurate, actually. Now, I'm not trying to convince the people that don't believe in diagnosis now. I do want to convince you of that another time, but that's not what this is about. It's just the way we form inferences about patients is emotional. Like the research is done. You can read about Drew Weston, I think, is the researcher at Emory University who did a lot of this work. So our emotional reactions to the patients treat us in an arrogant, condescending, and haughty way. And we don't even like register. We can't even say that. We just say, this guy is so narcissistic, it's driving me crazy. That's like how we arrive at diagnoses. A patient makes us feel confused, acts like we've hurt them. We find ourselves bending over backwards to be as accommodating as we can to avoid hurting them. Yeah, and then we realize I'm getting immediately entangled with someone with borderline personality problems. And that's how people make it's not a bad way to diagnose, actually. It's actually highly reliable. There's common concerns. Maybe I'm just being hypersensitive. How do I know this isn't just my stuff and not the patient's stuff? Well, those are dangers, but the truth is that when you've done this a lot, you really get very attuned to certain types of interactions, and it's highly accurate. You have like highly accurate antennae for emotional interactions, and you will realize, if not the exact diagnosis, this is the ballpark that I'm in. Mood disorders. How long does it take to recognize someone in a manic mood state? 30 seconds, 90 seconds, not even 5 minutes, right? How long does it take to know that someone is either depressed or very, very low affect? Very fast. Very fast. So maybe you won't make the diagnosis right away. Maybe this is their normal affect state, but you're ruling out depression right away when someone comes in with affect like that. So you're using your emotional radar for diagnosis, and it's highly accurate, actually, in a lot of ways. Yes?
Just a comment, this emotional way of feeling your way through a diagnosis. So obviously then verify.
Well, we do go back and verify, and usually you're right, yes. But we're doing this, like, you can't not do it. You know, you can't not do it. You can not do it by, like, not meeting the patient or using an objective method of, like, psychological testing that will be oblivious to what your subjective interaction was. Or you can have, like, one person do a clinical interview, another person do a structured interview. You can try to do things, so maybe for court or for some legal or financial purpose, but for just clinical work, we are using our emotional radar for even for diagnosis. In the back, yes? The research is that it's an emotional reaction, actually, especially with personality disorders. There's an interaction that's provoking you emotionally, and it's not just like the way a neurologist can look and immediately, like, did anyone read Blink, the book Blink, and the idea of thin slicing, like, you know, this intuition that you, that's part of it with expertise, but the research shows, especially with personality disorders, and it was done in the advent of, it was done during DSM-4 when there was a separate axis too, that it's an emotional experience of the interaction and not the symptom checklist. I think what you're saying is true about the axis 1 medical disorders, yes, but that's the research suggests it's actually an emotional reaction, yes.
So, in my mind, this seems to be what Dr. Klein described for that feeling in the stomach after reading this one.
Yes.
Kind of is able to identify that.
Right, I have a supervisor that said that every time he starts to worry that his clothes are not fancy enough, narcissistic personality disorder in the person he's interviewing, that's his like insecurity that comes out with certain people, that he feels pressure to impress someone, and that usually is what so that's a similar thing that Dr. Klein was saying. Yes. So the comment was that there's a difference between diagnosis, that it being a problem that a person has, or saying the person is this diagnosis. And then the best part of your comment is you said that I said something very important. That was the other, just want to get that for the tape. So we won't go through the treatment process now, but I will say we have, 8 minutes on treatment and consultation for therapists. So treatment, like we're the patient or client being treated by a therapist. That's what I mean by our treatment. Is how we learn to get to know our inner emotions, particularly those emotions that we're embarrassed about, ashamed of, or just wish we weren't burdened with. That's what treatment really does. Without treatment, most therapists will never be able to become aware of most of their vulnerabilities, and they won't be able to monitor their reactivity. This is also, generally speaking, even though we're not in this primitive category, we just have a much higher need for treatment than someone who's just trying to feel better. Like, we do have to delve into every nook and cranny of our psyches. I would say it's a 5 to 10 year process for most therapists. That's about how long some of us, really no one shorter than 5 years, honestly, I think, but some people much longer than 10 years, but it's 5 to 10 years of professional work on your emotional life to be able to know yourself well enough to do this work for 50, 60 years, you know. But even after many years in therapy, we continue to react to narcissistic vulnerabilities, attachment distress. We still struggle with anger, aggression, forbidden wishes. That doesn't go away just because you were in treatment. So sophisticated, informed listeners, and I mean psychotherapy supervisors or consultants. So the term supervision is the term for bringing your work to discuss with an expert, and they'll review your work with you. We've switched in Cincinnati to the term consultant because supervision is supposed to be limited to situations where there's an actual hierarchical relationship, like I'm your boss and I supervise your work and you're my employee, or I have like in an agency I'm superior to you. So this is like going to a consultant who's an expert. So we use now the term consultation unless you work like in the same agency or you have a limited license and you have to work under supervision. So going to a consultant, they're not caught up in the thicket of emotional enactments with this case, and they can very quickly see what we're reacting to, or when we describe what's happening in a difficult case. It doesn't take that long for them to sort it out. It's not because they're smarter and more insightful than we are. It's because they're not caught up in the mess of the emotions. So we still need to do that with cases, even that's different from therapy. That's a different need. And I want to give a mushel. Therapy opens up access to a jungle, and it teaches you how to drive the vehicle that you're going to use to tour the jungle. But consultation is like the tour guide that introduces you to each species in the jungle and shows you the terrain of the jungle. That's different than just getting in and knowing how to drive the car. You still need a tour guide in the jungle, and that's what a consultant does. That's different than therapy, you know. So we have 5 minutes for more comments or questions. Yes?
Something that I've struggled with in consultation or supervision as you work in the agency is sort of the feeling that maybe I'm not bringing out fully what happened. Maybe I was concealing some part of it consciously or subconsciously. How would you kind of address that?
Well, we all conceal consciously parts of what we don't want our supervisors or consultants to hear that we did. We all do that. The more experienced and secure you get, the more you reveal, because you realize like that everybody has these challenges in the work. I think it's the supervisor's job to help you bring stuff out, and it shouldn't take that long for a supervisor. Like, I mean, I have supervisees at very different stages of their career. I have like brand new medical residents. They're getting their absolute first cases in the world. I mean, it's like Haschalos Gemara, Heicha, Heichi, Hacha, Hachi. Like, they really don't know the ABCs of psychotherapy at all. They're brand new. And I have therapists who are very experienced, sophisticated therapists that are really deepening their skills, and some of them are more experienced than I am, but I just have certain skills that they haven't studied, and they're doing additional work at the Analytic Institute, and so I have really a wide range. And my early therapists don't bring, I don't know what's going on, and I say, like, I don't understand, like, what's going on in this case. Like, I don't understand what you're talking about, what's happening. Like, I need you to take better notes. I really have no idea what's going on in this case. Like, what the person came in, so it's the supervisor's job, if they can't tell what's going on, like, what did the person say when they came in? What happened? And so I think that it's like a skill to present your work to a supervisor, and also you guys work it out, because I'm interested in different things than another supervisor. So I think that's like the supervisor's duty. And I would say, like, I'm worried that I'm not presenting to you all the information that I need to. And they should say, well, is there anything you're aware you're not telling me? Why do you have that idea? I mean, you'll work it out. But I think it's a relationship. It really becomes, I mean, it's not psychotherapy, because they're not against you having good mental health, but they're not taking responsibility to help your mental health. They're trying to help your professional development. But it is like a pretty deep relationship when it's a good relationship. And I think that people who have a good supervisor can stick with them for many, many years, and usually that gets worked out. Who you're assigned at a clinic, like, Okay, I mean, if you're lucky, you got a good supervisor to clinic, but that's not what I'm talking about. That's administrative supervision to make sure that, I don't know, you have a treatment plan with like enough goals listed and it's going to be approved by Fidelis or something. I don't, that's not what I'm talking about for supervision. That's an administrative oversight for your job. That's important, but that's not really learning psychotherapy. That's making sure that your documentation will pass an audit, essentially. Yes? So can there be overlap between personal therapy and consultation? There are there's more than one view on that. The truth is that there are people who will not treat and consult with the same person. There are other people that will. It depends on the judgment of that pair. I think it depends on the pair. I think there are people that can get a combination of consultation and treatment, and there are other people that it would really interfere. The dual relationship will be too much of a problem. There's also a lot of consultation that sort of borders on the realm of therapy because they're talking about really personal emotional things. So the combination becomes more natural. I think it's hard to generalize. It also depends how much therapy the person's had before. I think it depends. Yes?
Never, as a supervisor, get into like a transference relationship.
Yes, always. The parallel process, yes, it's probably too much to get into now, but yes, what happens is that therapists find themselves acting out some of the same conflicts that they have with the patient with the supervisor. Is that saying we have to wrap it up? Okay. Okay. I really enjoyed this talk. Thank you very much. Thank you.